Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Look Up, the news and current affairs programme from 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 Media. Every week, myself, Finbar Padraig, and my co-host Padraig 𝐲𝐬 will look at news stories that either haven't got into the mainstream news headlines or maybe haven't had a fair hearing in the mainstream media. Thanks for joining us again this evening, Padraig. How are you doing?
I'm not doing too bad, Finbar. Thanks very much. Yeah, looking forward to going again this evening.
Oh, I'm dosed with a cold, to be honest with you, and I'm probably going to be sniffling through the whole thing, and my throat's quite sore, but we'll push ahead with things anyway. Padraig, you're going to open up with a story tonight in relation to direct provision won't end soon. Do you want to maybe give us a bit of an intro on what that is all about?
Sure, Finbar, yeah. So Catherine Day is the head of an expert advisory group set up to report on the government's promise to end direct provision in Ireland. The government commitment to end direct provision by 2024 looks set to be shelved in light of continuing accommodation pressures exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. Catherine Day said she believed the timeline set out by the coalition would no longer be possible to meet. The former Secretary General of the European Commission also urged the state to adjust the targets in the Housing for All plan to take account of the significant increase in the country's population. The coalition's white paper on ending direct provision proposed a two-stage blended accommodation system. Newly arrived asylum seekers would spend a maximum of 4 months in state-owned reception centres before being moved into not-for-profit housing secured through approved housing bodies. The group's report also called on the government to establish a state agency for the accommodation and integration of asylum seekers by the end of 2024. Departmental responsibility for the agency would be with the Department of Housing. The report was also critical of the overall government response and found that most of the heavy lifting is being done by the Department of Children. You'd have to ask the question, why do we have a department managing this which has no housing experience when we have a housing department which is better prepared and geared up for it? Minister for the Environment, Eamon Ryan, confirmed yesterday that Roderick O'Gorman would retain responsibility for the accommodation of refugees and those seeking international protections after December the 17th, when Leo Varadkar replaces Micheál Martin as Taoiseach. So, yeah, look, it's just more of the same, isn't it? There's no cohesion and there's no joined up thinking in any of these areas, and there's a lot of pressure being put on them.
Mm. And the direct provision system is inhumane in itself. I know it's the reality is that it's designed to be unattractive and discommoding so that it will attract less people to the country. I think that's one of the arguments that are made in favor of it. But ultimately, it is inhumane. And there are people accessing the asylum process and the refugee process who are genuine asylum seekers and who are genuine refugees. There are those who are taking advantage of it as well. Of course, there are. But if it's a case that the country's in need of economic migrants, workers, then if we could put in place a proper accessible system for people to go through that, so that asylum seekers applying for asylum, genuine asylum seekers, get treated within the asylum process in a dignified and a humane manner, and that people who want to apply to come to work here can go through proper processes in which they're treated also in a dignified and humane manner. But it looks like nobody wins here except the owners of these provision services, these direct provision services. Nobody else wins, to my mind.
I'd agree with you on that, Finbar. It's much of the same with all these initiatives that the government is engaged in. Like none of it seems to be thought through properly, and really, like, the dates are being pushed out now because of extra pressures that they're bringing in. So really, there needs to be a total new departure. And what we're seeing there is that, okay, they're having a change into the guard at the moment in terms of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil swapping who's in the ascendancy in this government. But there will be no change in any of these areas.
Yeah. And moving on to a similar story in relation to what's happening at the moment with the influx of Ukrainian refugees, and it would appear other people applying through the asylum process to access Irish shores and Irish services. We have government TD calls for cap on Ukrainian refugees as capacity has been exceeded, and we've got two different images with the same headline. Do you want to fill us in on this, Padraig?
Yeah, so Finbar was just really just a slightly humorous attempt to just highlight how the image on the left being the Examiner's image, I think, for yesterday, which shows remarks that were made by a sitting government TD in County Clare, who said that the county and the country have probably reached capacity, and they're quite proud of what they've done in that regard. But I'm making the distinction here that, like, if he wasn't from Fianna Fáil, would he probably be called a racist for coming out with that? And it reminds me of the episode of Father Ted where there was an episode with the Chinese. There was an influx of Chinese people, and he kept getting caught out in situations where he was looking and being seen as saying things that were of a racist nature, and he went to some lengths to say he wasn't. And this is something that you're seeing quite often now. People are afraid to speak. So I'll give you a quick rundown on the actual piece of material that we have there. Okay, so a government TD has said the government should cap the number of Ukrainian refugees arriving in Ireland, adding that we have now exceeded capacity. There is no shame whatsoever in us as a county and us as a country in saying we have done everything we can, Clare Deputy Cathal Crowe told Clare FM. And we want to do more, but right now capacity in terms of healthcare, transport, accommodation has not been just reached, but exceeded. Mr. Crowe said he was hugely proud of what had been done in Clare, where he said that the population is now 3% Ukrainian. Mr. Crowe said capping the number of arrivals is a sensible position. He said that there is support fatigue in Clare and fundraising has stopped. It can't be just about accommodation. There has to be health supports and other supports, he said. So what seems like a common sense kind of position has since been shot down by the government. Micheál Martin has made his views on it, that there won't be a cap. The government has come out and made that clear. It would seem like a common sense thing. Like, if you're bringing people in to a country that hasn't got the right provisions for them, what are you bringing them into? Like, they're leaving war, but you're bringing them into other hardships, and you're putting pressure into where they're going. So they have to think of the welfare of people who they're bringing in as well. It's not just a matter of how many can we fit in, but you have to have quality care for them. We're just after moving on from direct provision. So,
but the reality is that our cabinet's principal concern seems to be at all times their image amongst the EU jet set and the EU elite, the likes of van der Leyen, etc. And so their willingness to genuinely and wholeheartedly listen to the people of this island when it comes to their opinions about the continued intake of refugees when we don't have the capacity, and at the same time our government's baying on of war is what it appears to me they're doing, and egging it on as a part of an EU front that's encouraging the continuance of war in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine and Western Russia. And our government are failing to actually call that out and seek peace, and at the same time are incapacitating services and making it impossible for anybody, whether they're asylum seekers, whether they're people who were born in Ireland, or whether they're migrant workers or students, making it impossible for anybody and everybody to get any form of accommodation, whether it's a single B&B room for a night up to a home for a family. And it's becoming impossible. And this isn't about blaming refugees. It's about the policymakers at a national and an international level are the people that need to be blamed, I believe. And just on a final note on this particular point, we ain't seen the start of it yet. The major Ukrainian cities are talking about essentially their populations leaving the cities because of no electricity and no heating, no water services, no sanitation services into the future, in the very near future. But the reality is that they're not going to go to the countryside in Ukraine because there's even less services there. So they're going to go into the EU. And that's what's happening already. And that's what's going to expand and swell in terms of numbers. And we're actually talking about between 7 and 10 million more refugees coming into the EU over this winter, and many of them coming to Ireland. And so ultimately, everybody needs to collectively call for negotiations and an end to this war. And that means Zelensky and the Kiev regime sitting down at a table as soon as possible with the Russians to work out a peace deal that was already done twice before with the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements, which were reneged on by the various Kiev governments, and when they militarized the situation when they were supposed to be doing the exact opposite. So really and truly, the only way this is going to be dealt with, and the only way this is going to be addressed, where everybody can get some sort of satisfaction, is a peace deal be made between the Kiev regime and the Russian government, and it needs to happen soon. Just before we move on, Padraig, we are going to stay in the subject to a degree, but just before we move on from these headlines, do you want to make any more comment?
Just to say that if you just looked at as population increase, like if you took the whole migrant refugee element out of it, and if you just said that Ireland was going to have a spike in births, say, right, or a spike in its population, you would automatically then, as an organizer at government level, know that you would have to have infrastructure, services, and provisions for your population, and that's what we're really talking about. And not to get that confused with, like, obviously, like, there are some people that may look at it from not where people are coming from. In what I'm saying is it's purely a provision thing, that we haven't built our country in such a way to be able to absorb this properly, the way we're set up right now.
It's a provision thing, but it's also a case that the men, women, and children of Ukraine shouldn't have to go through this.
That's
They
true as
shouldn't
well.
have to go to another country. They shouldn't have to have the politics of their land manipulated for the last 10 to 15 years to an extent that it's been brought to war, in my mind, purposely to promote a monopoly of US energy in Europe. And that's, to my mind, what this at a macro level is all about. There are other elements in it too. It's never just one agency that gets advantage in a global plan. A global plan has to, or a major plan like this, has to facilitate and give advantage to many different parties for it to succeed or to get off the ground. I think within Ireland, even the issue of refugees and asylum seekers and economic migrants, I think it really does benefit and facilitates certain agencies within the state. It facilitates what I would consider mean-fisted businesses that want to make money in any way they can from the check with the harp on it. And so they love to see things like this. There being some people, their B&Bs and their hotels being filled up with refugees rather than with tourists. So there's a lot of, I believe, hand rubbing together in that regard. I also think from an economic policy point of view, if we want to continue expanding in terms of production, economy, etc., and becoming bigger and bigger producers and consumers and providers of services, then we'll need more workers. And I think that a lot of this is about taking workers into the country. But it's been done in a mealy-mouthed way. It's been done in a secretive and a deceptive way. And I think a lot of people are starting to see that deceptiveness now, and they're sometimes perceiving it to be something that it may not even be. I think that's something that we might mention later on. You were speaking to Joe Mooney from East Wall. Would you like to do an intro for him?
Yeah, so look, I just looked at the rally for the Raise the Roof rally that was on there at the weekend, and I thought it was kind of very relevant what John Mooney had to say. So if you want to have a listen to that.
Okay, we'll play it and then we'll come straight back.
Our priority at the minute is to calm down what's happening in our community, and when that happens, our next priority will be to put things right in our community, because the hate and the division which has been brought into our community, and I'm saying that very clearly, that has been brought into our community. I'm going to talk very briefly about racism, and I'm going to talk about the far right, but I'm going to choose my words carefully. It is not my job to stand here and excuse what anybody else has said or done, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make excuses for it, and I'm not going to try and explain it away. People have to answer for their own words and actions. But also, I'm not standing here as a mudguard or to provide cover for a minister who is making a mess of this process. Somebody posted during the week about East Wall being a racist community. It's not a racist community. Up to Wednesday 2 weeks ago, there was no organised racists in East Wall. There was no far-right activity in East Wall. There wasn't going to be. They wouldn't have got an audience. Nobody wanted them. Nobody was interested in them. This week, major players on the far right and agitators for racial hate have got a hearing in our community. They got a hearing in our community because the minister opened the door to let them in, they snuck in, and our job is going to be to have to get them out. It's not going to be easy. Now, something we've heard a lot about is the issue of consultation, about information and about engagement. Over the last 25 to 30 years, I've been involved in countless consultations within my community. We've been involved in consultations about apartment blocks. We've been involved in consultation about high-rise. We've been involved in consultations about parks, everything. Consultation isn't always easy. You put the information down, everybody gets to base their ideas on the facts, not rumours, not innuendo, not by shit stirrers. You deal with the facts and you hammer out difference of opinion you have, and at the end of the day, you're in a better place. If I was to stand here now and say, the minister put in a high-rise building in our community and there was no consultation, isn't that terrible? People might cheer. If I was to say that they drove a road through one of our important green spaces with no consultation, everybody would cheer. In fact, if I was to say they tried to close down the cobblestone with no consultation, everybody would definitely cheer. But if I was to say, last week they were moving refugees into an office building in East Wall and there should have been consultation, nobody will cheer and everyone will be going, oh no, we can't have that, we can't have that. Why can't we have that? What's the point in consulting about things that we might agree on that might be easy if we can't consult on the things that are going to be hard on? That's the whole purpose of consultation. And I can guarantee, hand on heart, which is something I never do, I can guarantee, hand on heart, if somebody had to come into our community, spoke to the community leaders in our community, spoke to the community networks, and then spoke to the community, we would definitely not have had the situation we have now.
Okay, Padraig, what's your take on Joe's speech?
Well, I thought it was good. I mean, he's identifying from his position as a member of the community, that he's seen people coming in the last week or so that they're not from there, they're not people that live in the community, and he's talking about community issues that are going on a very long time in terms of infrastructure for the area, of people that have been born and bred in the area who have been looking for accommodation as they grow up and move out, and hasn't been provided. So that gives you a context then to how the community seems to be getting affected by the imposition of what is in effect the direct provision centre, really, isn't it? In short term, they may say so. That's, to me, that's like the community side of it. He does allude to far right influences there. I've been watching this closely, and you can see some familiar faces that are associated with far right politics in the country. So it's not a conspiracy theory to say that there are people there pursuing it for those ends, and it doesn't sound like it's welcome in the area. It shouldn't be either. But it is important that people differentiate the real issues from. We don't want this becoming something that goes around the country as some sort of a witch hunt. This is very much government policy that we need to look at.
I'm not confused in myself on this issue, but I'm trying to find the language, and sometimes I have to kick myself for maybe being overly sensitive, and maybe that the subject matter is just so sensitive that we can sometimes be overly sensitive with language and beat around the bush when it comes to people's right to define and influence and have input into their own environment and their locality, and indeed their surrounding culture that they've grown up with as well, without being perceived as particularly racist or feeling that they are in some way superior to somebody else. And I did mention last week and asked the question, what are the limits? And maybe to emphasize that question again, you spoke about areas having their population increased by 3%. I've heard that certain areas, small areas, have had their population, only because of small numbers in the first place, increased far more than that by the intake of asylum seekers, often just young male asylum seekers. So what is the limit? Is there a limit? And if so, what is the limit? If you were to live in a very small village, and tomorrow to waking up and find that your village is quadrupled in size in terms of population, all young males that don't speak English from a country outside of the EU, for example, do you still not have a right to have a say in that?
I mean, if you look at
what's the limit? Is there a limit? Because my point is this, that even people who we would define as to be from the far right, they have a right to voice their opinion, so that people like yourself and myself can engage with them and say, okay, there may be issues here, but let's not suppress the conversation completely, so that ourselves and yourselves can have an open debate on this, so that we can actually identify what is based actually on hate, on the idea that there are people who through their genetic or their cultural backgrounds are more superior or are more inferior than others. And to be able to drag that out in a conversation that doesn't suppress people's right to say, well, I still would like to have an input into my environment and my, I'm not sure, are you getting my point?
I am, yeah. Like there's a sliding scale like of extremism, and some people that attend these in the capacity of supporting like clothes in the centre like that may not have the same extremist views as others that are there. It's just where they'll lead them to, like, it's where it's what it breeds into society, like people can be quite naive sometimes, feel like they're getting involved in what they see is right, but it can just lead so ugly so quick, and this is the worry. And then when you look deeper into the politics of some of the groups that are there and what their actual philosophy is, like it can only breed problems.
But I also have to re-emphasize the point that when we just go far right, no right to talk, no right to speak, then that's when things turn nasty. But engaging the so-called far right, and maybe actually agreeing on certain points, like, yes, the communities have a right to input, communities have a right to say whether they're going to double their population or whatever the case might be into the future, with young males and whatever the case might be, that people have a right to this more local democratic input into their surroundings, and to be not just consulted, but to have an actual say, because consultation can at times just be, in reality, be a delivering of an ultimatum and what's going to happen. So a proper consultation process rather than just telling people what's going to happen, I think is important. Just moving on a little bit from this, the East Wall residents or group or representative group, I don't know if there's one or more of them at the moment, and I do know, as you said yourself, there are political organisations such as the National Party and Irish Freedom Party becoming more and more involved in East Wall, and so it's hard to tell what group is what, who's involved in what at the moment. But I believe that the statement that has come out from locals in their area who've come together. So this is the East Wall's local statement, in which they speak about having blocked the port tunnel in Dublin already on the 28th, and that they're going to do so again tonight. So we haven't had any reports just yet from that as we're recording. So this is the statement here: press release, blockade of Dublin Port, schedule and plan going forward. Yesterday, November 28, 2022, we successfully blocked the port tunnel entrance into East Wall, backing commuter and commercial traffic up all the way back out to the M50 and beyond. This was a resounding success, and we would like to extend our gratitude to those who showed up yesterday evening to block the port. We would also like to extend our deepest apologies to those who have been affected by delays and backlog. Our actions are regrettable but necessary. We offered to work with the government on a solution, and they dismissed us. Their refusal to listen to us has forced our hand. Our protest will continue every Monday, Wednesday and Friday until further notice, or until the provision centre is closed down. This is just a small taste of what's to come. Protests will escalate nationwide if the government does not close this centre in its entirety. Those affected by this can raise their concerns directly with those responsible for bringing about this desperate situation. Details for the culprits can be found here, and to provide a phone number and an email for Roderick O'Gorman, Minister, and Pascal O'Donoghue, another government minister. They signed it off for Erin Gabra, the East Wall Committee. The East Wall Committee, I think, through this letter are inferring that they are wider, or that they're involved in or will be involved in a network that is wider than East Wall. What do you make of this statement, Padraig?
Yeah, I had a read of it as well. Like, so they are calling for people to come in an individual capacity, but it does allude to a wider influx, you know. So, but like I do know a good bit about the history and politics of say somebody like Malachy Steenson. So I wouldn't have, like, he's a good community worker for a very, very long time. Like, so I would be slow to think that there's you know, something organised that's going to be discriminatory out of this. Like, so to me, I'm still happy enough that the intentions are good there, you know.
Okay. We just have one last video of Matty McGrath, TD from the west of Ireland, who was asking questions in relation to this overall issue of Roderick O'Gorman, Minister in charge of these matters.
I want to ask you, Taoiseach, about the situation regarding in East Wall and many other areas that's going on in this country with inward immigration. Now, the Irish people, as you know, are the Céad Míle Fáilte and 1,000 welcomes and very welcoming people. But when you see busloads of young men being arriving in an area in the dead of night and being put into industrial buildings, and we see it happening in different parts of the country, we need a proper debate here and a proper understanding, and listen to communities, and not have the head of an NGO for dealing with refugees lecturing the community as to what they should do and how they should behave. I think it's gone out of hand, Taoiseach, and we need a major review of how this has been handled. I know you said that there should be consultation, in spite of what these NGOs, these highly paid NGOs, costing nearly $6 billion a year, they're running amok in this country, and they're treating the people like second-class citizens. We need to be, we need a proper legislation on this, Leiscan Cola, because we can't just sustain this. It's causing strife and angst for everybody, and we're trying to help people who are in a war, but this is not, these are not from Ukraine.
Taoiseach to respond.
As a country, we're providing accommodation to 64,000 people right now, many of whom are from Ukraine, men, women and children fleeing the war there, but over 17,000 of which are men, women and children fleeing wars elsewhere, because Ukraine is not the only war on our planet right now. There are wars in Syria, wars in Afghanistan, wars in Ethiopia and Eritrea. And just as much as Ireland offers protection to women and children, we also offer protection to men, because men are victims of torture, men are victims of persecution as well. So we won't make a determination on someone, whether we protect someone due to their gender. We'll make a decision in terms of when they've gone through an international protection application process, and the determination will be made at the end of that. Thank you, Deputy.
What do you make of that, Padraig?
Well, just on the point of NGOs, there is too many NGOs that have big influence in how the state is run. They're not elected officials, and they don't answer to the people. And as we've seen for the last couple of years, there's been a huge problem with democracy and debate in the Dáil. Never mind having it in the local communities, where the local democracy that, let's say, the committees in East Wall would be able to engage and have some sort of planning input into the development of their area. Like, none of this is happening. So every single problem that you'll find, more often than not, the root of it is that we don't have democracy in the country, and you're seeing it there again.
Yeah. As well as that, you know, this complete reliance and this looking us square in the eye and telling us what we know is not true, that, you know, all of these people that have been brought in are fleeing wars and things like that, which we know is not true at this stage. Many of the people who've come into the country over the last few years, I have got to know, and other people who are watching this, I'm sure, have got to know in a personal capacity, and we know their background, and they're open and honest with us, and they tell us that they actually came from the UK or they came from elsewhere. There's videos out there of people getting off buses being shipped in who are openly admitting that they've been living and working in the UK and other countries for the last number of years. So there are people who are seeking asylum, there are people who are seeking refuge, but there are a lot of people who are not. And as I say, it's facilitating an economic apparent necessity, according to the government, that we need to get more workers and more labour into Ireland. But this idea that we're children and we're not allowed to have an open discussion about our labour needs, and that everybody has to be sneaked into the country through a process that is not fit for purpose, in which more and more people are going to be pushed into this asylum process, into direct provision. They're going to be people who could be filling in our labour force, but instead are lingering in direct provision, and then there's people who need asylum who actually are coming from horrible situations, whether it's women who are fleeing marriage vendettas in India and countries like that, and who will be murdered. And I have met women like that, and I have met women who've had acid thrown on their faces in provision centres. And quite often those genuine asylum seekers are left in the background, because the males that are coming over from other places as economic migrants, this has been an experience I have had, they're louder quite often. And the people who are genuinely fleeing torture and horrible experience in the past, they're more timid, and quite often they're in a state of trauma and shock, and they don't know how to put their hand out and be heard first. So I think we need to be honest that the asylum process is not fit for purpose. It's being abused, and it's abusing at the same time. Any final comments before we move on this subject, Padraig?
Yeah, so it's come up twice there. I made the point originally when we were talking about Cathal Crowe and his comments about that we kind of reached a capacity situation with what we have to offer. And it came up again with Joe Mooney when he was saying, why can't we talk about this? So like I think it is very important, and you're saying it there as well. We need to be able to talk about these things, because what happens when you have censorship is it goes into a back rooms where there's not proper discourse going on, and it can get very cultish, you know what I mean? So that's what we want to avoid.
And dependent on emotion rather than proper discussion. Justin Trudeau is just not having a good few months, maybe not even having a good premiership at all at this stage. He's been reprimanded by Xi Jinping, the Chinese Prime Minister, a few weeks ago. Last week, he had to admit that he was caught out cheating and lying in relation to statements he made about Chinese interference in the Canadian electoral process. This week, his hypocrisy is wholly on show in relation to his statements about protests in China at the moment, about COVID lockdowns and continued zero COVID policy in parts of China. Now, remember that Mr. Trudeau, or President Trudeau, or Prime Minister Trudeau, has been particularly vociferous in wanting to shut down protest in his own country in relation to COVID and lockdown protests over the last few years. Here's what he has to say in terms of protests in China.
Canadians are watching very closely. Obviously, everyone in China should be allowed to express themselves, should be allowed to share their perspectives and indeed protest. We're going to continue to ensure that China knows we'll stand up for human rights, we'll stand with people who are expressing themselves. We also need to make sure that China and places around the world are respecting journalists and their ability to do their job. We'll continue to make that very clear.
That's from True North. Isn't that something else all the same to make such a statement? I'll play another video. This is actually Trudeau introducing the Emergency Powers Act to try to suppress protesters in his own country.
Developing headline as we're on the air this evening, north of the border. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau declaring a national emergency now to end the trucker protests and to halt anyone coming from the U.S. to join the protests. Here's our Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas now.
Tonight, Canada taking drastic new action to put an end to the so-called Freedom Convoy trucker protests, paralyzing the country's capital city. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act, a never-before-used law granting the Canadian government broad powers, including the ability to remove vehicles and freeze bank accounts.
Occupying streets, harassing people, breaking the law. This is not a peaceful protest. The time to go home is now.
Tonight, officials blocking people from crossing the border into Canada.
The Canadian Border Services Agency is already turning back non-Canadians trying to enter Canada to participate in blockades.
For the past 3 weeks, truckers have been clogging the streets of Ottawa, disrupting daily life, shutting down schools and businesses to protest vaccine mandates and all COVID restrictions. But tonight, the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest land border crossing between the U.S. and Canada, is back open. Police finally clearing the remaining protesters Sunday, arresting more than 24 people. The end to the week-long blockade can't come soon enough for American automakers. Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors all forced to shut down plants and cancel shifts. due to the disruption in the supply chains of car parts. David, this new emergency deployment, which will not involve the military removing protesters, could last as long as 30 days. David?
Pierre Thomas tonight. Pierre, thank you.
Okay, so there's been plenty of aggressive protests on view in the parts of China that there have been protests in. I think this is just another example of Trudeau trying to take advantage, and Western countries in general trying to take advantage of any social incohesion in countries that are not considered to be allied to NATO and elements like that. Here's just to remind people of how bad it got and how, oh my goodness. Here's it's like something from The Prisoner. This is something from Australia.
A man has been arrested outside a quarantine hotel after escaping from his room. Police say the 24-year-old man was returned to his Tullamarine accommodation without further incident after leaving his room without permission this afternoon.
Good morning. We start with breaking news out of Darwin, where 3 people have escaped from the Howard Springs COVID quarantine facility. Talia Sava's there for us. Talia, good morning. There's a search underway right now.
Now, major police checkpoints have been set up around Howard Springs for the past several hours. As you can see in these pictures, they've been conducting thorough searches in car boots, checking vehicle registrations, cars and buses alike.
It makes no sense, does it?
Yeah, but you can't leave your balcony to go to the fence to talk to somebody else. That's what's obvious, yeah?
So if I was at that balcony...
Make sense. So there has to be lines everywhere drawn, yeah? And one of the lines is you cannot leave your balcony and you cannot go to someone else. Where it makes no sense or it doesn't seem right to you, that is the line, and that's what the law is, yeah?
Give me a minute. Well, what is this in regards to? What's it in regards to? You haven't told me anything. Incitement for what? I told them not to go to the protest. Is it?
Now, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
Incitement?
What's that? Now, you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given evidence.
Excuse me, incitement for what? What on earth? Yeah. Excuse me, what on earth?
So just put your phone down.
Can you
record
this? I'm in my pajamas.
What's this?
I have an ultrasound in an hour.
Yeah, she's pregnant, so...
What was going on around the world just a couple of years ago. And the leaders of these countries now are gloating because of some protests in China. What were very severe lockdown, at times very severe lockdown regulations in parts of China where COVID have been breaking out. I doubt very much that the satisfaction levels of the population in Canada and with Trudeau are anywhere near the satisfaction levels with the socialist government and system in China amongst the population. And that's not according to any Chinese pollsters or pro-Chinese, but it's actually according to Harvard University in the United States, who do regular satisfaction polls on the Chinese population to find out. And, you know, they will take into account things like the possibility of people being in fear, etc., in China. And I think I'm fast at this finding out that China is not as locked down, is not as militarized, is not as Soviet-like as we are being told in Western media. But in this particular poll, the survey team found that compared to public opinion patterns in the US, in China there was very high satisfaction with the central government. In 2016, the last year the survey was conducted, 95.5% of respondents were either relatively satisfied or highly satisfied with Beijing. In contrast to these findings, Gallup reported in January of this year that their latest poll on the US citizen satisfaction with the American federal government revealed only 38% of respondents were satisfied with the federal government. So that is indicative of satisfaction. Now, I'm not saying that this, I didn't take the poll, I haven't seen the methodology of the poll, but it does, again, just call viewers to call into question everything that they're reading. And when they hear statements from people like Trudeau, I don't agree with lockdowns in China or anywhere else, but I don't cheer on the likes of Trudeau when he's criticising protests in China, whilst at the same time suppressing them at home. Any take or opinion on this, Padraig?
I don't know how liberal it is to live in China. You hear stories that it isn't at all But then again, like I think you've highlighted a couple of times in the last few weeks that that's not all necessarily what it's being presented as. So I'm trying to take a more open mind on that and look into it more and try and get more round views on it. In terms of Trudeau, absolute hypocrisy. He was massive authoritarian around the COVID issue. Lockdowns have been pretty much shown to be a very bad response to pandemics. They never were, even under the World Health Organization's pandemic policies in the past. They were never your go-to for a response, and they're being held strong by China. And people do say that China, being a one-party system and having an authoritarian regime, this is what they say, that they were able to implement lockdown and then it was exported around the world. Well, certainly when it came to different regions, we've seen how authoritarian it was. And Trudeau was an extremist on that, like treat people very, very poorly, like, so absolute hypocrisy. And if people don't remember like what's been going on for these last couple of years, it doesn't matter where you stood on the whole COVID thing. You have to be able to see these things for what they were, like, it's total hypocrisy now.
Yeah. I think again, just going back to the China aspect of this particular headline for a minute, we say that the Chinese Communist Party, the one-party system, it means that it's a socialist system, just like we have a capitalist system here. So we might as well call our system the capitalist party system here. There's no way that socialists within the EU can be elected and carry out their manifestos, the actual genuine socialists, because the design of the EU and its laws are to the effect that socialist governments, for instance, the nationalisation of industry, just can't happen under current EU regulations and laws. The nationalisation of service provision that isn't currently nationalised just can't happen under EU laws. So, there are a lot of similarities. I think this is really just about an economic jealousy thing again. I hope that China does lift its lockdown. I'm just concerned that there will be elements outside of China that will try to rise up China or rise up trouble in China through the protests that are happening over lockdowns, as there are always those who will take advantage of those kind of things. Just staying on the COVID narrative for another minute, it would appear that Twitter have stopped COVID-19 misinformation censorship and programs since earlier this month, early in November. Effective November 23rd, 2022, Twitter is no longer enforcing the COVID-19 misleading information policy. That's what's coming up on Twitter platforms at the moment. Any take on this, Padraig?
Yeah, so like censorship is a bad thing in terms of democracy and free speech. But there could be like you could see that an awful lot of stuff that maybe is off the wall coming in too, like, so look, while I'm against censorship, like, people need to be discerning for themselves, like it is a problem, like, with the internet as such, like, that information can be shared so widely and it mightn't be well sourced. So people should be their own filter. I don't believe that it should be done for you, because the problems that come with that then is that very, very honest and relevant reports are being taken out of circulation, which that's not good.
I think if there was a core tenet in our education system about proper research, about always knowing that will always be more than one side of an argument, to always look at who the funders are, to always look at patterns of legal cases, of claims made against people providing research, etc., and to take all of these things into account. If you don't, you are what I would describe as a naive functionist. You believe in a particular system, that something's supposed to work in a certain way, but you don't take into consideration human failings when it comes to the rolling out of systems. Failings such as greed, such as fear, such as ego, such as pride, all of these things that can input into research motivation, research rollout, research outcomes. So not being a naive functionist is a core tenet of any education system, I think. Padraig, we've got two stories left. This one's on the Northern Irish economy, or the economy in the north of Ireland, and it is certainly in no way outperforming, according to some reports anyway, outperforming the economy in the Irish Republic. Do you want to lead with this one?
Yeah, so Finbar, I think it's worth saying as well, like as we read these things, they're written in a certain speak. So if we're saying Northern Ireland or the South or anything like that, it's what we're reading. So I'll go with this anyway. A report has found that Ireland's productivity levels have grown to 40% above Northern Ireland's in the last 20 years. It's also revealed the export intensity is an important factor in driving Irish economic productivity. The ESRI produced and published a report in partnership with the Taoiseach Shared Island Unit and examined trends in productivity across both regions. In 17 sectors for which there is comparable data, productivity levels in the 26 counties noticeably exceeded Northern Ireland's in 14 sectors, with large gaps in administrative and support services, finance, insurance, legal and accounting. Scientific research is found. Northern Ireland has an advantage in electricity and gas supply as well as construction. One of the authors of the report, Professor Seamus McGuinness, spoke at a recent Belfast event organised by pro-Irish unity group Ireland's Future. At the event, he said gaps in education are among the factors that are driving Northern Ireland's lower relative productivity. Early school leaving in the north is estimated to be 2 to 3 times higher than in the Republic. He argued that the need for subvention costs in the event of Irish unity only exists because of the North's low productivity. In the event of a border poll ratifying unification, a transition period will be necessary to allow for the operational responsibilities of the North to transfer to the Republic. So, like, I suppose there was, going back over 100 years ago, they would have said that the economic powerhouse was the northern 6 counties, and often people would have said that the reason why the border commission drew lines where they drew them was obviously to copper fasten the Protestant majority, but it was also for economic reasons. And we're seeing that that's kind of gone now as well, and the demographics are changing. So I know that religion is something that's kind of on the wane in people's lives, and it's not as significant as was in the past when you're measuring Catholic and Protestant, but they still do measure in those binary terms. And like you're seeing, the trend really has gone now. Like, I think we're not far off a border poll. Now, whether Republicans wouldn't traditionally see a border poll as a route to unification to establish the Republic, but let's just accept that this is there now, and it is likely that it will be happening through a border poll. So it looks like it's not something that's very far off.
What did it mean by productivity?
I
They're
suppose
talking about GDP, or they're talking
Yeah,
about GNP, because that in itself is a very, very broad term. It doesn't really tell us very much on what they mean by productivity. Does it mean actual goods produced in a country through a manufacturing process? Does it mean I'd love to see a tighter breakdown of that, because you know, the people of the north of Ireland are highly productive in themselves, just like the people in the Irish Republic are. The Irish Republic has a lot of money pouring through it that is fake to a degree, that has been put in here for tax avoidance reasons, things like that. So maybe not so much in the north. The north doesn't have the north of Ireland doesn't have an economic financial centre as Dublin has, in terms of being able to trade in Europe and things like that. So I'd even be wary about the motivation behind that study and the findings of that study in itself. I don't like the idea personally of vying the workers of the north of Ireland against the workers of the south, and I don't like the idea of talk and the promotion of a united Ireland in a context that doesn't address the fact that we both have failed governments and we both have failed governing systems. And I think we need to both go through a unified process together of realizing that and doing something about it, and maybe having something unified at the end of that kind of a process, rather than some kind of fake forced process, which even the discussion and the debate might be designed in a way for it to never happen.
You know, they are. There is more and more reports coming out. Like, there's been studies done over the last few years which looks in economic terms, and there is this thought and perspective that economics is going to be one of the key drivers. Like, it's not going to be national identity or history. Like, and there will be certainly communities that are absolutely wedded to their identity, and the identity is all that matters. particularly like the loyalist community, like there's no money would sell Ulster for them, like. But at the end of the day, like they are not the majority, you know.
But there has been a history both within the nationalist. I don't even like using phrases like that. The nationalist and the unionist community. There has been a tradition of unionism from the point of view of labour unions, especially in Ireland and Wolf and things like that. And so I think it is a point and a subject area that all communities could unite on in creating a new type of Ireland into the future. And we'll just move on to the last story, Padraig. Sometimes we finish on a comical note. I think this is just pure comedy. I'm talking about bailed out banks to be allowed to pay bonuses of up to 20,000 under Donoghue plans. So the finance minister is planning to allow bankers to have bonuses again. These are the bankers and the banks that had to get bailed out after the last crash, and whose bonus system and whose system of greed and aspiration to grasp more and more led to the last banking crash, for which Ireland nearly had 50% of European debt, because we were the greediest and we were the most grasping in terms of our banks. And it would look like that culture is being encouraged again through the introduction of, or at least the facilitation of, bankers' bonus. What do you think about this, Padraig?
It's insanity, Finbar. So I'll give you a little quick rundown on what we have on it. So Minister for Finance, Paschal Donoghue, will seek approval from Cabinet Tuesday, which was yesterday, to allow bailed out banks to pay bonuses of up to 20,000, put lenders on a path to free themselves from executive pay restrictions, and also plans to allow banks to provide executives with non-pay benefits such as subsidised healthcare, which has effectively been banned since the financial crisis. The three surviving banks, AIB, Bank of Ireland and TSB, employ more than 20,000 people. It comes as Mr Donoghue prepares to swap roles with the current Minister for Public Expenditure, Michael McGrath, in less than 3 weeks. In the case of Bank of Ireland, Mr Donoghue plans to remove executive pay restrictions after it sold its remaining shares in the lender in September, even though chief executives at the bank have enjoyed salaries well in excess of the wider $500,000 industry limit, as the company avoided nationalisation after the crash. The bank's newly installed CEO, Myles O'Grady, is on the same €960,000 package as his predecessor, Francesca McDonagh. It is understood that the Cabinet will also be asking to give the nod to a proposal that the $500,000 pay cap will be removed at AIB and Permanent TSB once the government stakes fall to what have been described as appropriate levels. And just a reminder then that Bank of Ireland and AIB were fined a combined $197.2 million for their roles in the tracker mortgage scandal this year. PTSB was fined $21 million in 2019. So, like, these banks, even in the post-banking crisis era, where some of them were nationalised, some of them were like heavily owned by the people, properties taken into NAMA, people having debt forgiveness.
But they're also back to the 100% mortgage bull again. They're also back to the mortgage rates and the house prices of just pre-boom and bust times. It's just all absolute madness, and it's just a rehashing or a re-nourishing and re-nurturing of this culture of bank bonuses and bank greed. And at a time when we're actually about to move into a time of economic crisis. And I don't know if what's actually about to happen is that they're really facilitating paying bank managers to do some very unpleasant things into the near future. I think that might be what this is about.
May well be, like, especially when you think about how the debts were bought, like the huge property debts that were bought up and we owned as a state, like, and you think about the housing crisis we have now and all the problems that we have, the amount, and we still do own a whole lot of property, the amount of actual living property that we had in the state that was sold to vulture funds, and the people, like, over these last 15 years, the amount of times we've been done over, in effect, like, and they're just in your face about it. No problem, just let's print it in the paper. People do nothing about it.
So just now before Christmas, as you put your kids to bed, you kiss them on the forehead, you turn out the lamp and you say to them, children, let's have a happy Christmas, and let's think of the little bankers who this year are going to get a bonus. And your child will smile, and you look into their eyes and smile, and you'll both sleep so soundly tonight, knowing that banker is going to get an extra Ferrari or maybe an extra safari, something nice into this coming 2023. Padraig, that's all that we have for today. Folks, thanks for tuning in. I'm looking forward to a lemsip or maybe even a hot whiskey. That would be quite nice to try to deal with this cold of mine. Padraig, we're back next week. I think next week is our last week before Christmas. Any plans for Christmas? Staying at home, going away? What are you doing?
Well, I'll be staying at home, Finbar. I haven't regained trust in international travel yet, to be honest. No, definitely staying at home.
I don't think anybody would actually want me anywhere anyway. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, whatever you can do to promote this kind of media. We're trying to just get conversation out there that's suppressed in the mainstream media, and every little bit that you can do to help is really appreciated. We don't ask you for money, but maybe if you could give us 30 seconds to 1 minute to like, to share, and to subscribe. It's good night from me.
Good night from me as well.